Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held delegation-level talks with his Sri Lankan counterpart, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is currently on a 5-day visit to India in Delhi on Saturday. In a joint statement, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that terrorism is a major threat in our region and both Sri Lanka and India have fought this problem firmly. Prime Minister Modi said he and his Sri Lankan counterpart Mahinda Rajapaksa discussed joint economic projects in Sri Lanka and also on enhancing mutual economic trade and investment relations. Calling India a long-standing friend, Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa on Saturday thanked Prime Minister Narendra Modi for visiting his country in the aftermath of last year's Easter Sunday terror attacks and outlined that New Delhi has always helped Colombo in its fight against terrorism. Rajapaksa also expressed his gratitude to Prime Minister Modi for the neighbourhood first policy and the priority India gives to Sri Lanka. On this edition of India as well, we will take stock of Prime Minister Rajapaksa's visit to India. Joining me on the program today are KP Fabian, former ambassador. Also with us on the program, Rajendra Harshe, foreign affairs expert, and Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. What are the key takeaways for you as far as Prime Minister Rajapaksa's visit to India is concerned?
Let me put it this way. There are two or three things we are interested. One is, of course, security. We don't want any other power to have a certain prominence in Sri Lanka. That's one. Second is, of course, we want to deepen and strengthen our economic relations. Third, I'm mentioning it as a third, but doesn't necessarily mean it is the least important. That is making sure that the Tamils in Sri Lanka are treated fairly, that their rights, political rights, civil rights, human rights are respected. These are the three things which are of importance to us.
Okay, all right. We'll talk about what is of importance to Sri Lanka in just a bit. But before that, Professor, do you believe that post the Easter Sunday attacks that we saw, there is a change of heart really as far as the present Sri Lankan government towards India is concerned? In the past, when Mahinda Rajapaksa was at the helm, we saw how close Sri Lanka was to China. But right now, the right kind of messages are being exchanged between India and Sri Lanka. What's behind all of that, do you think?
No, I would not necessarily agree. Actually, one thing we have to understand is when Mahinda Rajapaksa was out of power, still Modi went and met him in person in 2015, 17 and 19. So there has been always chemistry between these two leaders. The second thing that Modi and India have been consistently advocating is fight against terror, and there is no compromise on that. All kinds of terrorist groups across the world, India has opposed. And after Easter tragedy, where 250 people lost their lives, and when India had already warned them that some such thing is in the offing, they didn't take proper note of it, and they have realized their mistake on this score. I personally feel that there is also one more problem which they are trying to now talk about openly. Gotabaya said it in his last visit, and that is role of China in this part of the world. That China has Hambon Tata port, China is investing in infrastructure in Sri Lanka a great deal, and somewhere as far as India is concerned, now they are saying that we are equidistant. Otherwise, somewhere China was trying to cross India's, India in this part of the world. But somewhere there is balance which has been getting stuck now, and about which I am happy. At the same time, some of the infrastructure-related project of India, like LNG project near Colombo or solar plant project or oil tank project,
they had 44,000 houses that we built.
That they have built. So they have to be stimulated and pushed further. And one point this ambassador talked about, I think we have to take seriously, and that is Tamilians in Sri Lanka. That's a very major point, because if you recall, Mahinda Rajapaksa, when human rights were violated in Sri Lanka very massively, I think US-sponsored resolution India had backed once upon a time, and somewhere we interfered in some way in the domestic affairs of Sri Lanka, but somewhere Tamil Nadu leaders, whether it's DMK or AIDMK, they have always made an issue. And now we have to understand that India is a union of states, and such states like Tamil Nadu, Bangladesh, Punjab they will play important role in making of India's foreign policy. And what happens to Tamilians in Sri Lanka, Tamilians in India are concerned about it. The point which Ambassador made, I only emphasize it. That's what I feel.
Okay, I think you are referring to Punjab, West Bengal and Tamil Nadu. So, General, as far as terrorism is concerned, how big an issue is terrorism and extremism in Sri Lanka? We saw what happened during the Easter Sunday attacks. How crucial will India's role be as far as trying to curb this in Sri Lanka in terms of intelligence gathering and such other aspects?
You know, to start, I think one point which we need to understand is that when Sri Lanka won the war, so to say, against the Liberation Tigers, it was a very major victory. And very few people, I've fought there for 2 years. And I know the state of the Sri Lankan armed forces. So I can say that for the Sri Lankan military to have won this war was certainly a great achievement. And after that, we had a decade or so of peace in Sri Lanka. And I think that is where Sri Lanka made the mistake. They thought the problem is over. And I think they let their guard down. Because extremism doesn't have to take any particular form. It has multiple shapes. And here it rose in the form of Islamic extremism. The strange thing was that they were aware of what these groups were doing. But they never thought that they would actually go down to that extent which they did. And this was despite the fact, as the professor so rightly mentioned, that the Indian intelligence agencies had given them a warning well in advance. And even I think 48 hours before the attack, they actually pinpointed the locations. Okay, this attack will take place in these particular areas. Now, what the Sri Lanka at that time thought was that India is trying to drive a wedge between the Muslims and the majority community there. And they didn't take any note of it, so obviously we went through the tragedy. Now the question is, this problem hasn't gone away. When we are looking at the rise of Islamic extremism, I think we have to look at what is happening in West Asia as of now. The Islamic State has not disappeared. They have only lost territory. The ideology remains as strong as ever. You are seeing other movements also which are connected with the religion in West Asia. You are looking at a similar level of fundamentalism which prevails in Pakistan, which is the fountainhead. So you will find Islamic extremism is not going to go away, and I think this is where both India and Sri Lanka need to cooperate. It is specifically in the field of intelligence. We are not talking about joint operations per se. I think both the countries are quite capable and competent of handling their own problems in their respective countries. But in the terms of intelligence gathering, in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of having a meeting between political and military leaders, I think it is very important that that sort of cooperation takes place, because terrorism, as repeatedly mentioned by Prime Minister Modi, is actually a threat to the world peace. It is not simply applicable to India. And the second aspect about terrorism is there are no boundaries. So to say that any particular country can be isolated from the impact of terrorism, I think will be stretching the argument too far. Sri Lanka was hit not because they wanted to hit Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was hit not because of any specific antipathy towards Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was hit because it was a soft target. That's all. They found a soft target, they created a huge impact, and they did it on Easter Sunday with 259 people being killed. But the more important thing is when you actually look into the type of the role played by the leaders of those killers. They were from well-to-do families, they were very motivated, and the woman involved, she was prepared to kill her children and her unborn child in a suicide bid, and she did that. So the way radicalization has seeped into certain sections of society, I think is a very dangerous trend, and I think it is this trend which needs to be curbed, and where not just India and Sri Lanka, but I think the entire South Asian region needs to put its, needs to get its act together, cooperate on intelligence especially, and then see that it is put down.
Right. Okay, taking the discussion forward now, Ambassador, how important is it for India and Sri Lanka to work together in the larger scheme of things in the Indo-Pacific region?
Yes, but I just want to add 1 or 2 points more about terrorism. as already mentioned, India had warned. Not only that, the sports minister of Sri Lanka was told by his dad, don't you go to that church on that day because it's dangerous. And he didn't go. In other words, his dad was somewhere else. I think he was in hospital. He knew that something was going to happen. Okay. Second, there was totally dysfunctional security management. The president and the Secretary of Defense on one side, the Prime Minister was nowhere there. I mean, you can't do this sort of thing, Now, coming to the question, in the Indo-Pacific, India and Sri Lanka have to work together. It is in their common interest. It is not in Sri Lanka's interest to be too close to, say, China. I mean, let's speak in plain English, It is not in Sri Lanka's interest to be too close to China. But at the same time, I have no doubt that Sri Lanka will play a very subtle game between India and China. They will, they will say now, we want to be closer to India. Statements have been made, but I welcome those statements, but I take them with a pinch of salt.
Okay.
Essentially, as a Sri Lankan, I would have done that. Essentially, as a Sri Lankan, I would have used my proximity to China in order to sort of, have some counterweight to India. I've spoken to Sinhalese friends, good friends. Well, when they are in a frank mood, they will say, well, we have to think of you as a friend and also as a threat. And when I ask, where is the threat? Do you ever think that we have any interest? No, but still. So, some historical memories and, so that is always there. So, they will play a subtle game between India and China, but we have to accept it. But there has been a good change, as already pointed out, but we should not overestimate it, because I remember when Rajapaksa lost and Sirisena came, our scholars in India wrote, here is a sea change, 180 degrees change in Sri Lanka's position. Well, one shouldn't expect such changes. Things are a little more complex. So, we have to work together, and for India, it's important to have stronger and deeper economic relations with Sri Lanka.
Okay, all right. So, those are some of the challenges that you spoke about, and those are challenges that we need to keep in mind going forward, is what you're suggesting. Professor, how big an issue or how big a role do you see China playing in the relationship between India and Sri Lanka? Is China always going to be a factor?
I'll tell you, obviously China is going to be a factor, and that should be a factor India should worry about. One thing is there that outwardly at least they are saying, the Sri Lankans, that they will be friendly, they will strike equidistant posture between India and China. As far as India is concerned, this is direct southern nearest maritime neighbor. When we want to do something, POC states are important to us, Trikonmalay is important to us, and India's role when it is taken into overall Indian Ocean region, I think Sri Lanka matters. Sri Lanka matters also as far as India's connection with Southeast Asia is concerned. All these are realities. But I think China has equally kind of played significant role in the generally South Asian countries, and that we cannot forget. Just to give you some examples, one is the amount of money that China is pumping in different infrastructural projects and carrying them out in Sri Lanka or Myanmar, Pakistan. That is something substantial, or Maldives. Another point that I could say is that somewhere China has built proper ports. Sitwe is one port, Chittagong is another port, that is in Bangladesh now, and then Hambantota, Gwadar port. So somewhere consistently, it's a kind of fashion to talk of string of pearls, but consistently all these immediate neighbors of India are being wooed by China. And if you look at trade figures, India's trade figures with all these neighbors is 1/3 of that of Chinese. That means although we have SAARC, India is supposed to be leading SAARC. It is the most dominant player in terms of size, population, technology, trained manpower. Still, China trades more with all the neighboring countries than India, and SAARC as an organization has not took off at all, because Pakistan is perhaps fighting India and China is allowing Pakistan to fight it in proxy way or whatever way. And that's where India has to worry, because everywhere, suppose you have neighbors who are surrounding you, who are constantly kind of, backing up China, whether it's Nepal or whether it's Myanmar, Sri Lanka. I think our role, whether it is the continental parts or Asia Pacific area, somewhere we will have to kind of, our role will be reduced. And more importantly, I would feel that in these conditions, when somewhere India's economy is really undergoing some measure of slowdown and crisis, we have to think more about all these realities, because somewhere militarily we have to be strong in terms of fighting terror. India has to be strong, and all these challenges before India are far too many. I quite agree with General that terrorism apparently disappears, but again it is invisible, dispersed, and comes back in some other form, and these ideologies are not easy to destroy. So you have got terrorism on one side, maritime security on one side, trade gap on the other side, China coming up as a major rival within the region. India is nothing as far as China is concerned. China is major Asian power today, superpower in Asia actually. They are in South China Sea, they are with Japan, they are with, they are also dominating Russia in the Eurasian region. So this is a problem which India easily can't contend with, but still whatever is happening between the two countries is positive. Somewhere perhaps trade can develop, somewhere we can complete the unfinished projects, somewhere if economies are competitive, we can give them a different turn. Sometimes, concessional prices can be given to their products. BIMSTEC is one more route where again this cooperation can be boosted. So there are ways and ways to work out this cooperation, but both Mahinda brothers are very shrewd, and they will also operate by defining Sri Lankan national interest properly, where China as well as India will have place, because they can't antagonize two very major powers of the region. It's impossible. So we have to take that into account and proceed, and that's a challenge.
Okay. Okay, all right. So China will have to do the balancing act, and they will do the balancing act is what you're suggesting. General, I saw you taking down a lot of notes when the other two speakers were speaking, so I'm going to let you have the floor and respond to what they have said.
One thing, when we speak of Islamic radicalism, there always the rationalization comes in. Oh, this party did that, so they did this. Now, please don't fall into that trap. When you look at Sri Lanka, please look at the history of the last 10 years. The Muslims were extremely violent also. Right? And they had political support, they had political patronage. Now, there will be a reaction and a counter reaction, so the Buddhists reacted. But every time when the Buddhists react, we say they did it because of this. And I think this is a very dangerous thing. When you look into India, you know that even today people are, when you have 500,000 Hindus thrown out of Kashmir by radical Islam, people are at that point of time started blaming the Hindus. Oh, they must have done something, so they were thrown out. Now, why are we rationalizing an extreme act? It is unacceptable. And I think every time we rationalize an act of this nature and we say they did it because of this, we are actually playing into the hands of the enemy, and we are really joining up with the enemy forces. So my advice is don't do it. On the threats part of it, there are two things which I think we need to be very clear about as far as our security concerns are concerned. One, as very rightly said by Mr. Fabian and Professor, both of them, Sri Lanka is going to look after their interests. India will look after its interests, and China will, of course, look after its interests. So I don't think we should start worrying about that. I see no reason why Sri Lanka should carry out a policy which suits Indian interests and not Sri Lankan interests. So the challenge really before the foreign policy is to see how our interests can converge. I think that really is the challenge, and I think Sri Lanka has realized the dangers of getting Chinese money. When President Gotabaya came to India soon after being sworn in, he actually made a statement that he will review the treaty with the agreement on the Humber-Tato port. The Chinese were quick to retort, no. And then he backtracked a little bit and said, we will look into some clauses of that treaty. The point is, every nation has got its own interests. For Sri Lanka, India is vital. They cannot do without India. So there is no way in which now, seeing the current Indian foreign policy, Sri Lanka is going to venture on a path which will be directly at odds with India's security interests. India's security interests, I will put it down, are basically three. One is the Indian Ocean region, to ensure the freedom of sea lanes of communication, and to see that Chinese influence isn't too overt as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. That is where Hambantota port gets important, and we don't want Chinese military ships there. That, I think, will be the red line as far as India is concerned. One. The second point is, as far as radicalism is concerned, I think all of us need to cooperate on that, on the question of radicalism. And the third point, as far as our security interest is concerned, is seeing that the interests of the Tamils in Sri Lanka is protected. Now, why is that important? Because anything which happens adversely in Sri Lanka, as far as the Tamil population is concerned, will impact on the state of Tamil Nadu. And I think as far as our security interests are concerned, we cannot accept that. The president has actually made a statement that they will carry out economic development in Sri Lanka as part of the conflict control measures. Now, that is really not appreciated by the Tamil community, because they want to do it. I mean, they want to set the terms of the agenda. They don't want the Sri Lankan government to set the terms of the agenda. So how we work around that is, I think, another thing which we should see. But I think this is absolutely vital to us, the which way we go forward on our security interests. And I don't think we should be concerned if Sri Lanka is having a friendly relationship with China or with anybody else, so long as it does not impact on our relations. And I think those red lines should be very, very clearly told. I think they are already sensitive to those red lines as per the statements which have been made. And so I personally feel that the relationship will, with the present setup, will again move forward. A very nice statement which was made is that India is our relative, China is a trade partner. Okay, this may be semantics, but I think even in these situations, semantics matters.
Absolutely. All right, closing comments now from all my guests. I've got limited time, so I'm going to ask you to be brief with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador, what's the best way forward as far as India and Sri Lanka are concerned?
The Sri Lankan side wanted India to give a little more time for paying the debt. In fact, Mahinda Rajapaksa said, if India gives us more time, then others will follow. Now, as regards terrorism, I entirely agree that we should cooperate, but I want to make one point, and I won't take time over that. Terrorists did not come from Mars. They are human beings. They are, of course, brainwashed, but we, the rest of the world, did something which made that brainwashing, easier. We facilitated that. Now, coming to the Tamil question, 13th Amendment, that is, there is no signal that they are going to do it. And while our Prime Minister said in his statement that I'm confident that Sri Lanka will do this, that and all that, in Rajapaksa's statement, there was no mention.
Right.
Again, his not mentioning is to be noted.
Right. Okay. Professor?
My point is only one, that although kind of I spelled out role of China and other things, I still consider kind of what General was saying is correct, because India is the immediate neighbor and very, very dominant neighbor. So it will be difficult for Sri Lanka to kind of trespass and try to play with India's security interest. And as far as India is concerned, perhaps being a larger country, somewhere Gujarat doctrine gave us some kinds of lessons. And wherever there is a possibility of being slightly generous, of relaxing payments of debt at a time period, India should do. But promote trade, even though economies are competitive and not necessarily complementary. Promote trade, promote cultural exchange, which we have not done so far. And educational exchange also is equally important. That should be kind of promoted somewhere. Because culturally Buddhism binds us. And that has to be kind of understood, because there can much can be kind of done after that.
Right.
So the cultural identity has to be again put across differently. And India is also a very major Buddhist country.
Sure.
So educational cooperation will bring different set of intellectuals in Sri Lanka and also India. We'll
Right.
mutually enrich each other. So that's important.
Right. All right. And General, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think India's foreign policy is something which I have really admired from 2014 onward. This has been an outstanding success story. Amongst all of the achievements since 2014 till date, I think the foreign policy outreach has been the best. And this is a success story, and I see no reason why we should be shy about it. I think this process should continue. You see, both the political and the diplomatic outreach towards Sri Lanka is strong, and I think we should continue with that. The people-to-people contact, as very rightly said by the professor, this is something which I think we can take up many times further up. And the more contact of people-to-people movement takes place, I think it'll lead to a better integration between the two peoples. And finally, I think as far as terrorism is concerned, I think we need to cooperate. We are cooperating, yes, but I think not just with the Sri Lanka. Can we make it a pan-Asian thing? You see, the whole of Asia gets together, including West Asia. Can
Broaden
we
the
actually move
spectrum,
towards that road? And if we move towards that road, I think it will be good for the region. Because my biggest fear is actually not what is happening in South Asia. It remains what is happening in West Asia. And if West Asia explodes, I think the consequences are directly going to be faced by us. So for us, it is important to see that the situation remains stable. And in that stable climate, I think we can all grow. As the Prime Minister said, we grow together.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.